Trooper Peter Halket of Mashonaland is a unique contribution to the literature of empire. It forms a fitting counterpoint to the stories by Kipling and others. For one thing, it was written by a woman, Olive Schreiner, who all her life was very unconventional. She didn't really fit in with her society in South Africa, and she was considered a celebrity but an oddity when she came to England and was part of the literary scene there. What made South Africa so inviting to the British in the last half of the 19th century was the discovery of diamonds in 1867. Schreiner's brothers went to try to mine for gold in the region. The diamond region and the gold regions were kind of the same. And she went to observe up close and personal with her brothers the life of the prospectors. Later in the century, towards the end of the 1800s rather, the Jameson raid was a source of political outrage for many British people living in South Africa. Jameson was working on behalf of Cecil Rhodes, who already controlled the diamond mine area and wanted to try to extend his digging operations into the land that had been claimed by the descendants of Dutch settlers, the Boers. The Jameson raid was an attempt to overcome the Boers militarily, even though all the people on the raid were volunteers who agreed to help Rhodes and Jameson do this. The Boers repulsed them, and this paved the way for the Anglo-Boer War of 2 years' duration, 1899-1902. Trooper Peter Halket was not actually a British soldier. He worked for the South Africa Company. He worked for Cecil Rhodes, in effect. And although the company was organized along military lines, today we would say that they were a bunch of mercenaries, not regular British soldiers. Again, here's a view of the diamond mine, what it looked like in the late 1800s. An entire pit dug and with terraces going down the side. The people who really dug the diamonds were black. Those who watched them and policed the operation were white. Black workers could be executed if they pocketed the diamonds. They were carefully searched going out of the works at night, and it was it was considered a very grave offense should they try to steal anything. Cecil Rhodes was a bandit. I mean, he was a bandit, a racist bandit. That's really the only way to say it. And because Africa was a wilderness and a patchwork of various competing and warring kingdoms, the British found a way to insert themselves, and Rhodes felt that he had a right to try to carve out a commercial empire for himself. And his rationale is that the Britons were the first race in the world, meaning the best, and that more of the world we inhabit is the better it is for the human race. So he's making the argument that British success raises all boats. Common imperialist argument. Just fancy those parts that are at present inhabited by the most despicable specimen of human being. Here he's meaning Africans who don't share European culture, so clear Eurocentrism or ethnocentrism here. What an alteration there would be in them if they were brought under Anglo-Saxon influence. Again, very clearly, unambiguously racist. If there be a God, notice he says if, I think that what he would like me to do is paint as much of the map of Africa British red as possible. And there is the British red region that he's thinking about. Again, running all the way from Egypt down to the tip of South Africa, a whole corridor there filled with natural resources. Again, the tropical diseases had kept Europeans out of Central Africa until the 19th century and the discovery of quinine and other medications to treat tropical diseases. But unfortunately, Europe decided to carve up Africa, what was known as the Scramble for Africa in 1884, and the European powers awarded themselves various sections of Africa to govern and to profit from. Because again, as far as Africa was concerned, the main thing was getting the natural resources that the continent was so rich in. This is to give you an indication of where we are talking about in terms of where was Trooper Peter Halket. Again, his story seems to have happened sometime between the Jameson Raid in 1895 and the beginning of the Anglo-Boer War, the Second Anglo-Boer War in 1899. So somewhere between that approximately 4-year period is when Trooper Peter Halket is out there in the veldt. Kimberley here is the source of the main location for diamond mining. Here in South Africa, this area was primarily controlled by the British, but the yellow part, it was primarily controlled by the descendants of Dutch settlers known as Boers. And it is this area the British want to control, not satisfied with their rather pastoral territories here. They want this region because this is where the gold and the diamonds are, and where the Jameson Raid took place. So, if you want an unambiguously commercial statement of why colonialism happened, Peter Halket will give it to you. And it really kind of turns our stomach in this more enlightened age. All men made money when they came to South Africa. Barney Bernardo, Rhodes, they all made money out of the country. 8 millions, 12 millions, 26 millions, 40 millions. Why should not he? He, meaning Peter Halket, considered his business prospects. When he had served his time as volunteer soldier, he would have a large piece of land given him, and the Mashonas and Matabeles, two native groups close by, would have all their land taken away from them in time, and the chartered company, Rhodes's company, would pass a law that they had to work for the white man, and he, Peter Halket, would make them work for him. He would make money. He goes on to tell the stranger, we don't come out here to work. It's all very well in England, but we've come here to make money, and how are we going to make it unless you get ends to work for you or start a syndicate? And the use of the N-word throughout here certainly should be objectionable to us, but that's historically how Certainly Olive Schreiner was against this, but she, against any degradation of native people, but she used terms that would have been common among the soldiers that were crisscrossing South Africa at this time. It doesn't get much more barefaced grab and go than this. The white people don't want to have to do work. They've taken the trouble to come all the way from England, and if they're going to take that trouble, they expect to get rich. That's what they're there for. That's why they've come out. They had no prospects of improving their situation in England, and they think if they come to South Africa, gold and diamonds will fall in their laps. Well, that doesn't happen. And so it's important for the stranger to change Peter Halket's mind about what he's there for. Halket has seemingly no sense that he might be contributing to genocide of the indigenous people. Why does he change his purpose? Well, for one thing, the stranger he encounters asks him, who do you know, who do you really admire? Who do you really want to model your life on? And Peter Halket says his mother. My mother never even would kill our ducks. She let them die of old age, and we had the feathers and the eggs. And she was always drumming into me, don't hit a fellow smaller than yourself. Don't hit a fellow weaker than yourself. Don't hit a fellow unless he can hit you back as good again. So in other words, a real sense of fair play, that Peter Halket should not be taking advantage of others. And he begins to compare what he was taught when a child, his formative years, with the way he's currently living. That's what the stranger gets him to do. And he begins to question the role of the company in South Africa. As the stranger does this, the stranger says, who gave the land to the men and women of England? The African land. Who gave that to the British? Why, the devil. They said it was theirs, and of course it was, said Peter, meaning the company said it was theirs. And the people of the land, did England give you the people also? Peter looked a little doubtfully at the stranger. Yes, of course she gave us the people. What use would the land have been to us otherwise? And who gave her the people, the living flesh and blood, that she might give them away into the hands of others? Asked the stranger, raising himself. Peter looked at him and was half afeared. Well, what could she do with a lot of miserable ends if she didn't give them to us? A lot of good-for-nothing rebels they are too, said Peter. So he denigrates the native people by calling them the N-word, and he says they are lazy, and he says they are rebels. So all the possible stereotypes about people we oppress that are possible come out of his mouth. The stranger grabs on the rebel idea because that's something that it's pretty easy to overturn. And he says, well, what is a rebel? And Peter, of course, says that they're going to teach the Africans a lesson, and they're rebels because they oppose Britain. Finally, this stranger talks him out of being so sure that the people should be, the people of Africa should work for the British, that is their purpose. And so the stranger says to him finally, Peter Simon Halket, he said, a harder task I give you than any which has been laid upon you. In that small spot where alone on earth your will rules, bring there into being the kingdom today. And that's the focus here. in that small spot where alone on earth your will rules, bring there into being the kingdom today. And again, this stranger, this allegory of Jesus, says to him that he's not off the hook just because he can't do great things, just because he can't get rid of the company, just because he can't assassinate Cecil Rhodes, just because he can't do big things, doesn't mean that he shouldn't do small things right where he is, in that small spot where alone on earth your will rules. Bring there into being the kingdom today. Love your enemies, do good to them that hate you. Walk ever forward, looking not to the right hand or the left. Heed not what men shall say of you. Succor the oppressed, deliver the captive. If thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he is athirst, give him drink. And this new purpose motivates Halket for the second part of his tale. How does he demonstrate that he has learned that lesson? He actually opposes his military superior and says to him, how do we know this one was a spy at all? It would be a terrible thing to kill him if he weren't quite sure. Perhaps he was hiding there because he was wounded. And then he broke out again after that, saying, these men were fighting for their country. We would fight against the French if they came and took England from us. So again, see, he's made a connection that, but for the grace of God, this could be Britain at the mercy of some other country. And if we have to fight against them, we ought to remember they're fighting for freedom. We shouldn't shoot wounded prisoners when they were black if we wouldn't shoot them if they were white. That's a revolutionary idea. The idea that not to treat black people in a subservient way. And that made an impact on the people who heard Halket talking to his superior officer. In fact, it's pretty clear that the company is the enemy because it's favoring unfettered capitalism. And that's really what Halket is opposing. If these men, said the stranger, would rather be free or be under the British government than under the chartered company, why then, when they resist the chartered company, are they more rebels than the Armenians when they resist the Turk? Is the chartered company God, that every knee should bow before it, and before it every head be bent? Would you, the white men of England, submit to its rule for one day? Okay, notice, we've got two imperial powers here that are stepping on each other's toes. We've got the British government, which has to be accountable to the people back home, spends their money, their tax money has to be accountable to them for what is done. And we've got the chartered company, Rhodes's chartered company, which has very loose ties to British government, if any. There are no rules that prevent you bringing a hired army, a private army, into Africa and doing whatever you want to do. At least there weren't at this time. People who thought about it knew that Rhodes was, number one, he was getting rich for himself. He was enriching self. And number two, he was killing a lot of the Africans who were supposedly helping him. His policy was that he would rather have, he even says it, I would rather have land than natives. And so if he has to kill a few natives to get land, he will. But again, the stranger, who is an allegory for Jesus, stresses social responsibility. The sin that a man sins against himself is his alone, not mine. The sin that a man sins against his fellows is his and theirs, not mine. But the sins that a man sins in that he is taken up by the hands of the people and set up on high, and whose hand they have armed with their sword, whose power to strike is their power, his sins are theirs. There is no man so small in the whole nation that he dares say, I have no responsibility for this man's action. So he's clearly saying Cecil Rhodes is doing what Cecil Rhodes wants, but you can't walk away and say, oh, well, he can do whatever he wants. He's a private citizen. No, there are a lot of people, men coming out from England to South Africa to work for Rhodes, to enable him to do this kind of dastardly land grab. And what about those Dutch settlers who live on the land he wants to steal for his gold mines? They live there. They've lived there for 300 years. Why do they have to move? Again, he's going to move them off and not give them mineral rights. I think we're all familiar with the idea of selling mineral rights on your property. Oh no, the Boers weren't going to get mineral rights. He was just going to get them off, get them to move, get them to leave. That was what was planned. Certainly an interesting story that the stranger, the Christ figure, tells Peter Halket betrays great gender ethnocentrism. Again, think back to what we said about the British memsahibs, the British women who come out to India and want to maintain a little kingdom. They're the angels in the house, but they want their house to be a British house, even though it's in the middle of India. And they don't want any flack. They don't want to do anything differently than they would do at home. They don't want to become Indians. They just want to help their husbands make money from India. And they want to live in as British a fashion as they possibly can. Again, I say gender ethnocentrism because it was the women, the she who is deadlier than the male. It was the women who prompted the men, in large part, to keep British society closed to Indians, though it had previously been open. The stranger Jesus tells a story about a preacher who stands up against the rapacious company and tries to get his parishioners to realize that they should not be trying to take land away from two groups, from the Mashonas and Matabele, and also, again, like Native Americans, they were promised certain lands when their lands were impinged upon. But, already the Europeans want to move them out so they can have the lands they're settled on, which are rich in gold and diamonds. The preacher's wife, in the story that the Jesus figure tells, the preacher's wife is furious with him and says, don't upset people. Don't make them think about these things. We want our sons to have good positions in society. If you are telling them what they're doing is wrong, they're going to make your life miserable, and you're going to lose your church. They're going to put you out. And then what are we going to do for income? And the other women will take it out on me. The other women will not call on me. Our church is more and more made up of poor people. Perish the thought that a Christian church should welcome poor people. Money holds by money. If your congregation were Dutchmen, I know you would always be preaching to love the Englishmen and be kind to the blacks. If they were Kaffirs, you would always be telling them to help white men. You will never be on the side of the people who can do anything for us. In other words, she's indicting her husband, the preacher, for being a man who is not self-centered or trying to make money off his profession as a minister of religion, which seems to me to be a pretty good thing not to be doing. Again, this is a long passage, and I'm going through this relatively slowly so that you have some passages to look at as you're thinking about writing papers about post-colonial work in these texts. So it's pretty clear that the stranger is upset with Peter Halket and the British, largely because they have deferred to Rhodes in such a way that he's been able to do whatever he wanted. And this is to injure and kill many of the native peoples. Again, we know he's a Christ figure because he has wounds in his hands and feet. And again, he wants to get Peter Halket thinking straight about the danger that the company poses to him morally. Cry aloud to the working men and women of England, you who for ages cried out because the heel of your masters was heavy on you, and who have said, we curse the kings that sit at ease and care not who oppresses the folk, so their coffers be full and their bellies satisfied, and they be not troubled with the trouble of rule. You who have taken the king's rule from him, in other words, a parliamentary society, the king is really a minimal consideration. It's mostly parliament voted in by the people. You who have taken the king's rule from him and sit enthroned within his seat, is his sin not yours today? If men should add but 1 hour to your day's labor, or make but 1 fraction dearer the bread you eat, would you not rise up as one man? Yet what is dealt out to men beyond the seas, whom you rule, wounds you not. And I think that's a pretty pointed look at asking the British not to be ethnocentric, but to recognize the claims of humanity that the native Africans and the Dutch settlers, the Boers, that they all have, and that they should be treated in no wise different than the British themselves would want to be treated. When it comes to white and black, the stranger is absolutely adamant that white and black must live and work together. Peter Simon Halket, cry to the white men and women of South Africa, you have a goodly land. You and your children's children will scarce fill it, though you should stretch out your arms to welcome each stranger who comes to live and labor with you. You are the twin branches of one tree. You are the sons of one mother, meaning black and white. Is this goodly land not wide enough for you, that you should rend each other's flesh at the bidding of those who will wet their beaks within both your vitals? Look up, see, they circle in the air above you. Wow. Picturing Cecil Rhodes and the company as a bunch of vultures who are going to eat the corpses on the battlefield of both black men and white men. The white men are going to die to enrich Cecil Rhodes. The black men are going to die defending their homelands. Pretty sad situation. And in fact, towards the very end of the book, after Peter Halket has in fact lost his life trying to help, he helps the black prisoner escape, and in fact he loses his life in the gun battle that happens when they discover the man's escape. But he has done what he can in his corner of the world to be honest and upright and to treat other human beings with fairness. I think it's really interesting that this leads some of the Englishmen to really think about what they're doing as colonial subjects. Do you believe in God? Said the Englishman suddenly. The colonial started. Of course I do. I used to, said the Englishman. I do not believe in your God, but I believed in something greater than I could understand, which moved in this earth as your soul moves in your body. And I thought this worked in such wise that the laws of cause and effect, which holds in the physical world, held also in the moral, so that the thing we call justice ruled. I do not believe it any more. There is no God in Mashonaland. There is no God in Mashonaland. There is no justice. Cecil Rhodes is not just. His whole company is put together for his benefit, not for the benefit of any people. The colonial, the man who is from South Africa and who lives there, doesn't want to hear that. Are you going off your head like poor Halket? No, but there is no God, said the Englishman. Again, what does he mean by that? He means there's no justice where Cecil Rhodes is in charge. So the post-colonial analysis of Trooper Peter Halket, ethnocentrism, otherness, and resistance are the three key concepts I want to look at. So let's talk about resistance first. This picture, disturbing as it is, there it is, was the frontispiece. It was the picture, the photograph that went on the front cover, or next to the title page in her book, Trooper Peter Halket. Why is that? What is the relevance here? These 3 black men have been hanged. Peter refers to this in his talking to the stranger who represents Jesus. He talks about the people, that he was one of the people who waited around and watched them die. Again, why are all these people doing it? It gives them some kind of sadistic pleasure to see others suffer. It cements their idea that they are the superior race because these black men whose country they are stealing can easily be killed, can easily be taken down, or taken out. And they stand around looking pretty pleased at that. And Olive Schreiner particularly asked that this be used in her text. So let's consider the idea of otherness. I think it's interesting that he thinks of his mother as this is before the stranger comes up. As he looks at the fire, he sees his mother's fat ducks. He's told us elsewhere that his mother would never kill those ducks. They were basically pets. They provided feathers and eggs. And in comparison to life with his mother, the respect and the kindness that she showed, he sees the huts where he lived with the prospectors and the native women who used to live with him. Again, not that uncommon, and not that much different from without benefit of clergy. He wondered where the women were. Then he saw the skull of an old Mashona blown off at the top, the hand still moving. He heard the loud cry of the native women and children as they turned the Maxims onto the crowd, and then he heard the dynamite explode that blew up a cave. Then again he was working a Maxim gun, but it didn't seem to him it was more like a reaping machine he used to work in England. And what was going down before it was not yellow corn, but black men's heads. And he thought that as he looked back, they lay behind him in rows like the corn in sheaves. This, it seems to me, is a terrifying vision. The Maxim gun, as you know from the videos, was an engine of death. It was an early machine gun that could mow down, injure, and kill many people at a time without having to be reloaded. It was something that the natives, even if they had old-fashioned flintlock or other kinds of guns, they would not have had anything nearly this deadly. And again, he's talking about firing this Maxim gun into rows and rows of black indigenous people as though he were reaping grain at home in his agricultural past life. That it was like working a reaping machine. And again, we talk about death as the Grim Reaper. So that's exactly what he sees himself doing. and because he can compare it to something he's done before, he doesn't think much about it. But it does come to his mind that he, again, there are lots of these incidents where he has abused natives in the past, and one of them is when he captures a black woman with a baby in the bush. They didn't shoot her, but they raped her, and a black woman wasn't white. Again, otherness. They don't feel things like we do. Black women black women are very sexualized. They like sex. Our white women don't like sex. So we'll have sex with this black woman whether she consents or not. But he says his mother didn't understand these things. It was all so different in England from South Africa. You couldn't be expected to do the same sort of things here as there. He had an unpleasant feeling that he was justifying himself to his mother and that he didn't know how to. So there's no doubt that there is some guilt hanging on to Trooper Peter Halket. There's guilt there, and there should be, because he has done unspeakable things to natives because he believes, especially native women, because he believes they're not really human. Again, in our previous talking about Marxism, we talked about capitalism, meaning that human beings end up being treated like commodities. And he identifies himself as one of the cogs in the machine, not one who is going to make money, but one who is going to help the bigwigs make money. There's not too much cakes and ale up here for those that do belong to it if they're not bigwigs, and none at all for those who don't. I tried it when I first came up here. I was with a prospector again, so they're talking about prospecting for gold. If you hit it big, you'll be rich for life, and that's the dream that all of the white men have. I was with a prospector who was hooked onto the company somehow, but I worked on my own account for the prospector by the day. I tell you what, it's not the men who work up here who make the money, it's the bigwigs who get the concessions. So it's the people who own the mines, the concessions, the right to open mines on a piece of land. The concessions are what bring in money. The sections about the black girls are hard to take, but they're valuable for us to see that that Peter Halket really treats these women as he would never treat his mother or a British woman. He says the whites you've got to support. If he were to have a liaison with a white prostitute, he would have to support her. But the blacks support you, and when you're done with them, you can just get rid of them. I'm all for the black gals. The speaker says absolutely nothing, and he looks pretty sick about this comment. No wonder. The story about the two black women that he had as concubines in his house comes full circle. He takes on a second black woman. He basically buys a young girl and realizes she's just too young to know how to do much, to be a help around the house. So he buys a second black woman from one of his fellows, and they will sell her. He just has to give him enough money. Well, actually not money. I think it's liquor. He has to give him enough liquor to pay for her. But he likes her looks. He again, there's none of the sentimental attraction that we see in Kipling's story without benefit of clergy here. He looks at these women as his possessions, And he's glad because they were useful around the house. They're commodities. She made a garden. She and the other girl worked in it. I tell you, I didn't need to buy a sixpence of food for them in 6 months. And I used to sell green mealies and pumpkins to all the fellows about. He made money off these women whom he purchased. Again, Britain had supposedly gotten rid of the slave trade, but had they really? Big question. Again, and here's where the mimicry and hybridity comes in. To be successful, to have a liaison with this British man, and we find out later that this woman is actually kind of a spy for her own people, to know what the British are doing. When she leaves, we figure that out. She picked up English quicker than I picked up her lingo. Mimicry, she's able to use English to find out what the British plans are, and she took to wearing a dress and a shawl. So she adopts British clothing, so he will think of her as more British than African. But in fact, her mimicry is a form of resistance. After he leaves, he has been called out on patrol for the company as a soldier. The two women scooted. It was all the big one. What do you think she did? She took every ounce of ball and cartridge she could find in that hut, and my old Martini Henry, which is a kind of gun, and even the lid off the tea box to melt into bullets for the old muzzle loaders they have. And off she went, and took the young one too. The fellow wrote me they didn't touch another thing. They left the shawls and dresses I gave them, kicking about the huts, and went off naked with only their blankets and the ammunition on their heads. So, did they really try to be like the British? Only as far as it benefited them to get supplies for the armed rebellion. These two black women were going back to their tribal people with ammunition that could be used against the whites. And although they had been wearing British clothes, they got rid of those. What is his problem? He, again, is treating these women like livestock. I wouldn't have minded so much, but she was going to have a kid in a month or two, and so was the little one, for anything I know. She looked like it. I expect they did away with it before it came. They've no hearts, these blacks. They'd think nothing of doing that with a white man's child. They've no hearts. They'd rather go back to a black man, however well you've treated them. Has no concept that this is resistance, that they are defending their own people. Thank goodness he does eventually understand. The stranger is able to persuade him that, in fact, these people are trying to save their own homes and their way of life. Well, in summary, Peter Halket comes to have double consciousness for the people of South Africa, both black and white. While he very, very much falls into othering them, the South African blacks, and even the Dutch, who are white, but they're not English, and they're not part of the chartered company. I say double consciousness because in the end he is able to empathize with the black man whom he is supposed to shoot as a spy, and he refuses to do that. So it's civil disobedience. He does recognize that he himself can do small acts of resistance against the injustice perpetrated by the company. And his example causes others to question their loyalty to a company which is clearly unjust. Again, as in Without Benefit of the Clergy, indigenous women bear the brunt of imperialism. They are often sold as commodities, but in this story anyway, it's the English women who perpetrate the worst colonial oppression through their ethnocentrism. In the story we get about the preacher's wife who is so worried about her social position that she won't if she doesn't want her husband to do the right thing, and ask the civil authorities to stop harassing the Boers and the blacks.